Hello everyone and welcome to this evening's event where we're celebrating European Day of Languages with Colm Tóibín and three of his translators. I'm James Hadley and I'm just going to very quickly introduce the event, which is very kindly supported by the French embassy, the Greek embassy and the Polish embassy in Dublin under the EUNIC EU National Centres for Culture. And this event, in this event, please would you stay mute throughout, but if you'd like to leave your cameras on, that's perfectly fine. And we do welcome you adding your comments and questions to the chat box, and we'll try and get through as many of these as possible. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce or pass over to Her Excellency, the Greek Ambassador to Ireland, Ekaterini Simopoulou. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, James. Good evening. I'm very glad for being given the opportunity to address on behalf of EUNIC-Ireland this unique event organized by Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation in partnership with EUNIC-Ireland and the embassies of France, Poland, and Greece. I believe that today's event is very much representative of the goals and the mission of EUNIC. EUNIC is a European network of organizations engaging in cultural relations and working to make culture to count in international relations. EUNIC currently counts 38 members based in all EU member states and associated countries, and especially the EUNIC-Ireland operates within the umbrella network of EUNIC and aims to promote cultural diversity and understanding between European societies. Through culture, we build trust and understanding, and we overcome linguistic barriers. By marking with this event the European Day of Languages and the International Translation Day, which is celebrated actually today, EUNIC is highlighting the importance of knowledge sharing and of the capacity of building bridges through culture. This year, we are translating Colm Tóibín. Colm Tóibín, who is one of Ireland's greatest writers, and his work has been translated in more than 30 languages all over the world. He will be joining us today, and we thank him very much for this in a discussion about his work in translation with his French, Polish, and Greek, respectively, translators. I understand that we're all looking forward to listening to this extremely interesting discussion. So to follow, and thanking the translators who are supporting this event with their participation, I would like to pass and hand over the floor to Professor Colm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those very appropriate and kind words, because the Centre, in collaboration with EUNIC-Ireland and the various embassies, is delighted to be able to host this event for International Translation Day and the European Day of Languages. I think one of the reasons that I'm particularly happy with the event this year is that one of our main participants, Colm Tóibín, has been somebody that over the decades, and often when it was neither profitable nor popular, has been an ardent advocate of literature and translation, the teaching of modern languages in Ireland, the kind of the general opening up of the island to the languages and cultures of everywhere. He's been a stalwart, articulate exponent, both in the areas of public policy and in various public pronouncements in this area. So it seems to me that I can't think of anybody more fitting to take part in a conversation tonight that's honouring, if you like, the craft of the translator, and is also honouring the linguistic diversity of Europe. So joining Colm Tóibín tonight are some of his most distinguished and hardworking European translators. Anna Gibson, who has translated a very substantial part of Colm Tóibín's oeuvre into French. We're joined by Athina Dimitriadou from Greece, who has translated a number of Colm Tóibín's works into to Greek. And we're also joined this evening by Jerzy Kozłowski, who has translated, again, a significant number of Colm Tóibín's titles into Polish. So one of the things that we're, of course, doing tonight is honouring the work of Colm Tóibín, but also, I think, honouring the work of those translators who have brought the good news of Colm's writing to so many different places and cultures. To some extent, I mean, introducing Colm Tóibín is a completely thankless task, because there's so much to say, because someone who is been so active in so many different areas, the novel, the short story, theatre, poetry, literary criticism, travel writing, journalism, and who, in addition to his substantial body of published work and his many prizes, has held teaching positions in illustrious institutions like Princeton and Columbia University. But Colm, if I could start off this evening's proceedings, and I'm very grateful, because I know you've already been, I think, in conversation with the Guardians, so we're kind of working your hard here tonight. But just to ask maybe a question or two about the your most recent work, The Magician, which looks at the life and family and times of Thomas Mann. And I suppose that the first question, Colm, is why Thomas Mann? What attracted you to him as a writer and to engage with in this latest work?
I suppose it was the unknowability and the mystery, the sense that he couldn't be pinned down, and that within him, first of all, in the erotic area, his erotic life was lived, I think, underground, and it was in his diaries, and it was in his dreams. His interest in young men. He was a married man with 6 children, and it isn't as though that was stable. I mean, we know from the diaries how it could come and go. It became memory. One kiss of a boy called Klaus Hauser, one kiss, the amount leading up to it, and the amount of memory of it. And on the other hand, or perhaps as part of the same idea, his political life, he became known in America in the 40s as a great Democrat, as a great figure who would restore some idea of decency to German public life. That yet in 1914 he was fired up with patriotism. He was a militarist. He was interested in bloodshed. And, and in between, he's a great conformist in certain ways. So that it's not, the whole point for me was that I could never be sure about anything. And often he is silent. He's silent because there's a battle going on in him between two ideologies that is totally unresolved. So it's that lack of resolution. So it isn't as though I could go from writer to writer to writer and just go on. I couldn't do it with Oscar Wilde. I mean, I've written a lot about Wilde, but I couldn't do this with him because I'm so certain sometimes of where he is and what he's doing. The same with George Eliot, or the same with James Joyce, that their sexuality I'm pretty sure about, their politics ditto, and that it's not as though with someone like Henry James I could work, because even more so, he is made up of ambiguities and opposites, and you sort of get energy out of that. At least I do. So that's why. That's why.
So you think there's something about, a novelist's engagement with a writer like Mann that you have kind of potentials or capacities that are not there for the biographer, or who to some extent is
yeah.
It's cornered by fact, or a kind of the empiricism that goes with the archival work now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as a novelist doing this, you do have to have your own empiricisms. That you are using a structure, and that structure is effectively you're often basing work on the initial work done by biographers. But Thomas Mann himself wrote a book in the 30s about Goethe, called The Beloved Returns, or Lotte in Weimar, where he tried to imagine Goethe in old age falling in love with someone young, and he deals also with the sort of with politics and ideology in that book. So it was as though, and I think this is true with anyone attempting to do this, that you're using personal preoccupations, and this is not a literary exercise. I'm not involved in some game. This is about things that preoccupy me, that I can explore using his life in the same way as he could using the life of Goethe, and in the same way as Jem could in using the life of Dostoevsky, or Michael Cunningham in using the life of Virginia Woolf. In other words, I said that you're finding things that preoccupy you anyway in the making of other characters. And this is just another way in to actually exploring those things that are pressing and preoccupying and disturbing and fully unresolved, or sometimes even, unresolvable.
And was there one thing that struck me, Colm, reading the book, was that the importance of the female voices. Like it begins with Julia, with the Brazilian mother, and then Katia is a constant throughout the Magician. That her presence, her voice, her perspectives, and then of course there's this kind of Erika and her kind of interaction with her father and mother and so on. So was the were those female voices, the female perspectives, was that something that was conscious, or it just came out of the telling the story?
It comes out of Enniscorthy, where when I was growing up, I think this is very common, where if there were women in the house, if my aunts came to visit or some of their friends, there'd be all sorts of excitement, and the language, the way they speak, would be filled with flavour and texture. And I would love going in and just listening to them, see what they're all saying, even if they were just talking about a coat. But if I went downstairs, there would be grumpy old men, even young men would be grumpy old men, sitting there, and they'd be smoking, or they'd be talking about some goal scored on Sunday. And so too, I mean, in Thomas Mann's childhood, the senator, his father, was busy. He was out, he was doing business. He was grumpy. He was often silent. Whereas the mother, Julia, was born in Brazil, and that she had a completely different perspective on the world. And that, so it starts there somewhere, but it goes on to the fact that this is a really interesting marriage. And that it's very easy to see, the marriage of a gay man to a woman as being something that will make her very unhappy. And in this case, Katia Mann is way above all that. She sees him coming. She has no illusions about him. It's not as though she's shocked by his homosexuality. Her grandmother is the most famous feminist in Germany. These are very advanced bohemian people. She marries him. He doesn't bore her as somebody else might bore her. She's afraid of being bored. He's not preposterous as other people seem to her. She's a very clever person, one of the early German women to go to university to study science. And, her family is tremendously rich as well as everything else, and assimilated Jews. And, so that marriage becomes something that gives her a great deal. She's much more than a mother or a wife. She is someone who is ahead of the game a great deal politically. And also her presence in a room will always add something to the room. So yes, having her speak is always, it sort of breaks up the sort of monotony of his time in the study or of his time pondering on things. She is, she makes a very interesting kind of noise in the book when he's mainly silent. And indeed, her children begin to do that too. But the main thing for me was to work on the marriage all the time. I mean, every time she's mentioned or appears, I say, what is the cliche and why? Why? I mean, I must really, really make sure that I'm not going there with that I'm not even giving away this business of a writer's wife nonsense. That I'm actually finding something else in her that really arises from her astonishing background in Munich and the sort of the people she was brought up among. I mean, her brother studied with Mahler. Her father had funded Bayreuth and was, they were protected as assimilated Jews by Winifred Wagner. That they were very unusual, interesting, and advanced people. They were almost figures that we might associate with the 20s in Germany. And here we have them in the early years. of the 20th century as very advanced people, just giving us a signal that it's not, you cannot characterize Germany as being something that, you know, erupted in the 20s, that there were people, and before that, who were very, you know, free thinking and serious about human progress and about sexual liberty. And Katja Pringsheim, who married Thomas Mann, was one of those people. And this novel is partly a portrait of what she did when she was married.
Mm. One thing that has, you know, struck me, just, you know, thinking about The Magician, and then thinking about, you know, your 2018 book, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, about the fathers, about William Wilde, John Butler Yeats, and then the New Ways to Kill Your Mother, the book from 2012, is literary families. Is this, I mean, does it interest you because you had very strong personalities kind of coexisting with each other in some kind of Oedipal wrangle, or is it more the singularity of each of these people that fascinate you?
I think we drift into our lives, you know, that I'd love to be able to tell you that I had a blueprint to start with, and I spent every day sort of following it through, including one that I would write about this. It really happened by accident, I think, with the London Review of Books, especially, where I think they were trying to find a place for me, but they realized that I wasn't really, you know, I wasn't a theorist, for example. I wouldn't fit into, you know, and there were other things they found out that I wasn't very good at, but that if you gave me a book, if you gave me a biography of someone who had a big family, in other words, if you gave me, you know, a book on George Eliot's marriages, or if you gave me, you know, you really anything like, you know, biography of John Cheever, I was away. You know, I would go back and read the novels. I would get busy, and I would become utterly preoccupied for ages with the texture, with the details of this life, and that was basically, you know, just high gossip, and you know, we shouldn't, you know, exalt, you know, but I found that could keep me going for ages, and that I could write at least with a sort of ease about that. So it really arises from having failed at a number of other topics. This was the corner I got put into.
And I mean, because you know, we'll go on to sort of talk to the translators soon, Colm. But I suppose one of the things that a kind of bridging question really is that you know, there's one particular point towards the end of the Magician, where Mann is kind of looking at his library. He's looking at the bookcases, and he's thinking about his work in German and his work in translation. He specifically, this is mentioned, the translations of his work, and wondering whether it was a kind of ultimately an attempt to impress his father, to get some kind of, you know, eternal recognition. But to what extent, for you as a writer, are you aware of the kind of the shadowlands of translation out there, with your work going into other languages? I mean, is it
very little, but there are funny little moments where with the title of this book, I mean, the working title for a period was Pacific Palisades, where Thomas Mann ends up living, and I like the sound of Pacific Palisades, but I mentioned it to Spanish editor, who just said, you know, we can't do that. How will we manage Pacific Palisades? What would it be in Spanish? And then I said, well, the other title we're thinking about is The Magician. And she immediately said, well, of course we can work with that. So that's one thing. I suppose the other thing is that I worked for a very short period as a translator, and I'm really bad at it. And one of the things that I wanted to do really was, I thought if I translated art books, from, you know, they were beginning to produce art books in Catalan, especially, you know, in the Picasso Museum, but also in the other museums in Barcelona, and I could translate from Catalan. So, but my problem was with art books, often you get a sentence that in Catalan reads fine, but in English means nothing. And I thought it was better just to leave it out, just to sort of just go down and see if there was another sentence later that might have a concrete thing that I could get into English. And I couldn't really translate concepts language, you know, and my tendency was to shorten it and then see when, obviously there was a gap between the two texts. One was, you know, say, 5 pages, and the other was 4 pages, and then I would try and fill in some way or other. But I realized this is awful, and that anyone reading it will think, this is written in my translation read like a foreign language. And it struck me that being able to translate properly is very close to writing a novel, in that you're imagining somebody else, that you're entering into another spirit and seeing if you could render it. You know, there's that idea of that the ego, that the first thing you must do as a novelist is get involved in serious self-suppression. It doesn't mean the bits of yourself won't ooze out and make their way into the text, details, but that you're generally feeling that the page or the screen is not a mirror, it is blank. You must fill it. That it is not that, you know, Narcissus stay home, and that so that you try and give as much as possible to the character, even if you're writing autofiction. You know, that the character becomes the thing, and that you yourself must stand back. And I couldn't do this as a translator. I just wonder if that would be an interesting connection between translating and writing, in that your job is to imagine another, and not actually impose yourself on the text or on the moment.
Absolutely, and I think that if I could bring in Anna here, just on that particular point that Colm has raised, do you feel, you know, because you've translated a substantial number of Colm's books into French, and do you feel it's a kind of, you know, a self-abnegation, a kind of do you have to suppress a sense of self in translating into French, or is it something really quite different?
Well, there's no abnegation, really. That's not the point. Mm. The point is that you are between languages, and you are between what can be said in one language and what how you feel that. Exactly, everything you were saying, that is really correct. But then you must find a way of bringing that into the other language with the means of the other language, and still manage to maintain something it's very delicate. You can't really define it. And if you start using words like soul or so, you're going to be a bit, you know, but it's extremely delicate, and it's every word, every construction, every rhythm, and you have to find a way. And I would say it's unique. It's unique for each writer. But then you might think that when you've done several books or translated several books by one writer, you would know, but you don't. You have to start all over again. I mean, of course, you have some help because you know a few things, but it's always new, and the book emerges, and it's unpredictable. And there's one point where it starts to come alive, in my case, in French. But in a way, it's a French that has become Irish. It's a French where I try to put this intensity, this very low key, you know, sensitivity, the simplicity of Colm's, the words he uses, you know, the rhythms, try to get that. In French is not easy, because French, it's not the most natural thing to do in French, right? So it's fascinating work. It's not abnegation, it's fascinating work. I don't hear you.
When you talk about, you know, hibernicizing your French there, Anna, is it that because trying to capture the kind of this extraordinary intensity, the pressure, the prose, that there's certain kind of rhetorical traditions in French that resist that or push
Oh,
against it?
absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. I mean, French, actual present French is, it was a colonization from the inside. You know, all the regional languages were brutally suppressed. And so if you go in different regions where people still speak, for instance, Occitan, you'll have the possibility of that, this simplicity, the humor, but in the common French, the French you learn in school, and the one you're supposed to use, and especially write, comes down from the court, you know. So it has a not a natural tendency, absolutely not, but a historical cultural propension to be very, you know,
formal and
yes,
regal.
yes, exactly, and it's an imperial language, you know, and it has such a conscience of itself, you know, and I have had to fight, you know, proofreaders, everyone. It's much better now. We've come to a much better understanding over the years. But in the beginning, I remember they would tell me, we don't say that in French. And I say, but that's not the point. We are trying here to hear something that's different, and we can say it in French. And this is the way it might sound. Try to listen to what is being said, you know, what is being suggested. And it's much better now.
Colm, I mean, just, you know, taking up one of the themes that Anna's raised there, do you feel yourself, like, over the course of your career, that there are all these different Englishes in your head that are kind of jockeying for supremacy, that there's, you know, maybe more formal metropolitan varieties of English, and then more, you know, specifically regional Englishes here on the island, and then, you know, English as an international kind of idiom, you know, part of the kind of the global sort of business speak. And so, do you find, like, you know, Anna's talked about that as a translator trying to deal with these different varieties of language. You as a writer, do you feel like internally within the language it's of English, which again is a language of power and domination, has been historically?
I suppose I'm uneasy about the term Hiberno English. It seems to me too simple, and I think it's because, as your question is, that there's so many versions of that, so many levels and layers, that there isn't just one thing. I mean, part of the problem, I suppose, in Ireland is that some of us write in what I would call standard English, and then the minute I say standard English, I have to start laughing. And you know, that when at the end of Portrait of the Artist, Stephen, who Dedalus, has been wondering about the word Tondish, and his famous moment, the Jesuit says it must be an Drumcondra word, you know, and it makes him feel belittled because it's a local word he's using. And of course, he finds it's in the dictionary. It's in their dictionary. And you know, I suppose at a simple level, if you're having an argument in Enniscorthy between 3 generations, and there's someone older, and that someone older will eventually use a structure which is a direct translation from the Irish, an Irish which has not been spoken in Enniscorthy for for centuries. But she will say, "Oh, he's after being sick. I mean, he's after being really sick." But the granddaughter will say, you know, will not use that construction, but yet it can be said to her and she'll understand it, and it will not be foreign to her. So you're in that dialogue, you're in a funny place. But the next sentence could equally go, you know, it became dark early, and then you think it grew dark early. You have to try and move a sentence from a stilted sound into the sound that they might make if they spoke, even though this is not dialogue. You have to get it in a softer sound. And yes, English can be the language of Queen Elizabeth I and indeed II, but if you soften the sound of it, if you bring it down notches, you can get a very soft sound in English. And wherever English comes from, I mean, in other words, that it didn't begin with a king. It began, I mean, it was taken up by them, but it has you can actually go down even if you're writing, descriptive sentences. He came into the room, he looked towards the window, but then he went back and stood in the hall. He waited for a moment. I mean, no matter what you do with that, it does not sound in any way like the language of power, because you're not talking about power, but also because languages allow those layers to come from the person who's speaking them and the person's circumstances. And so the first problem I had, I remember being in Barcelona and someone was looking at my first novel, and Anna will know all these issues because she's been there all along, where a woman has gone down to paint in the port of Barcelona, and she's painting away, and there's ships coming in and out and consignments and all sorts of people with documents. And the last sentence of the paragraph is she's describing in first person what she does. And she says, "I paint trade." Now in English, I paint trade. I paint, you can say it in an English accent, I paint trade. But I would do it in a way, I paint trade as 3 bangs. I paint trade. And we were having a lot of fun over how do you get, I have no idea how you get it in Polish, so Jerzy will know that, but how do you get it into one of the Romance languages? How do you get into Spanish? How do you get into Italian? How do you get into French? I paint trade. I paint trade. I paint trade. Paint trade. And so that, anyway, I've always thought if I paint trade as the big problem facing translators.
So Jerzy, you've been mentioned in dispatches here. Maybe like to bring you.
Can I just interrupt you for one more thing? Just to say, today's a big day in the history of translation in Poland, because Jerzy, in translating a book by Siri Husved, has finally got his name on the cover of the book as the translator. I think this happened today.
Congratulations! That's translators will know what a major achievement that is. Jerzy, so if I could just bring you into the conversation here, and because you've translated a number of Colm's work, and what one did you find the most challenging? In terms of either the text itself or bring it into Polish.
Well, I would answer perversely that Colm's work is not challenging at all, because with some writers you find some sort of affinity with them, and you feel kind of in tune with them so much that you kind of go with the flow. It's like riding a wave. You are just guided by them, and it seems effortless, and of course there's always some amount of effort involved. But I must say, with Colm, it's always been a wonderful adventure and a delight to work on, and I'm so happy to be able to say it in public once in my life, at least now. So. But having said that, I could also add that The Master, which was the very first novel I translated from Colm, that was the biggest challenge, because as you remember, it was set at the end of the 19th century. And if you pick up a novel written in English, a contemporary novel written in English at the end of the 19th century, you will find that the language hasn't changed so much since then. Of course, there will be some old-fashioned elements, but generally, the general sense will be that it hasn't really changed that much. But if you pick up a novel written in Polish at the same time, contemporary novel, you will be amazed by how much the language has changed in the last 100 years. So I wanted to capture that in my translation. I wanted that to be reflected, especially in the spoken language, in the dialogue parts. so that was a bit of a challenge. I needed to do some reading, some research, and well, I think it came out quite good. So,
do you feel those an Irish translator from 17th century, a man called Wentworth Dillon, the Earl of Roscommon, this essay on translated first, and he said that you can only translate a writer you're friends with. That there has to be a deep sense of friendship, or that it's hard to translate a writer you actively dislike or kind of loathe. I mean, so do you think that is that true? I mean,
well, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be, I would be unemployed most of the time if I believed that. But even with some writers you really like, it's a struggle, with each sentence and each paragraph. But I will say it again with Colm. It's like, I don't know what's at work. Is it some sort of magic, or is it some sophisticated neurological process? But it works, and it's just fluid.
And do you get a sense that when you're translating each of the books that you're kind of inhabiting, Colm's fictional world? I mean, does it kind of take your life over, or can you sort of go into your office, just work in it, and then go and have your tea, and then that's it?
Well, this is true about any translation, any book. You have to immerse yourself in it totally, and if you want to be successful, you need to do that, and well, forget about all the distractions. You have to go really deep into it. So yeah, I would say.
If I could bring Athina into the discussion here, because Jerzy is working from English into Polish, which is a kind of a non-cognate language. Greek, of course, has had many influences on English, but is nonetheless they're two quite distinct languages. And how have you? I mean, Jerzy mentioned the specific difficulties of translating the master in terms of getting the right speech variety in terms of the period. What about your own translation work into Greek? What was the text that you found the most challenging?
Well, the most challenging for me to translate was the Testament of Mary. Not only because I think it's unique in style and it combines contemporary theatricality with the austerity of a religious text, but because I met with a problem which I hadn't expected. When I started translating, I had a question to myself: should I choose semi-ancient or full modern Greek for the extracts taken from the evangelists? Colm Tóibín has used King James Version, of course, with dies and everything. But I had to use this simplified ancient, I thought, rather, of using this simplified ancient Greek that was spoken during Alexander the Great's period, and we still hear it in church. So I thought that I should use this language for the small extracts from the evangelists, and I chose it because they have a formal tone and a linguistic weight. But on putting it on the paper, I felt that this imposing diction was too much, both for the translated text and the contemporary reader. So I chose in the end to use modern Greek, employing a number of alliterations as means to keep the aforementioned austerity, and of course to retain the rhythm of the original as much as possible. In other words, I wanted to convey to the contemporary reader the hieratic nature of parts of the novel without estranging him or her with a too authentic biblical tone. And that was a great challenge during the translation.
And did you find, that critics or reviewers picked up on that effort? Did they acknowledge that kind of work or the labor that had gone into the text, or was it simply not mentioned? I mean, what was the...
In Greece, we don't have a full criticism on the translation. They usually write 2 or 3 lines in the end of the presentation. Generally speaking, in all the books I have translated, the translation was supposed to be quite good. Nothing more. No.
Oh, right. That was just that they simply kind of just affirmed that, and it was. But you know, in terms of Colm Tóibín's writing in Greek, I mean, do you feel that you are producing translations now for a public that is becoming familiar with the work?
Yes, I can assure you.
Yeah. So it's a kind of a movement forward there. And Colm, if I could bring you back into the conversation again, and kind of changing, reversing the terms of trade a little here, is the just about translation in your own life, in your own work, and you know what. Because I said this at the outset, and I say this very sincerely. You've always struck me as someone who's kind of defended, you know, language plurality and translation in public spheres and spaces, and I wondered then about, you know, the impact and the importance of translated literature for you as a writer.
Yeah, I just want to respond, if I could, just, and I'll come to that in a second, to what Athina said. The Testament of Mary is written in English, but most words in English won't work in the text. In other words, any informal word, that I'm trying to find as many in a way Latin words as I possibly can, or if I bring in an Anglo-Saxon word, it will be because it's needed just here. But what it is formal, but you're absolutely right. It isn't archaic. So it isn't as though I'm actually trying to find a language of an earlier century. It is contemporary speech, but it's a funny version of it, which is really formalized and stylized. So I'm really grateful to you. I'm really grateful to you for thinking that through in that way. But I can see the layers that you had at your disposal. But that sounds an absolutely fascinating approach. And one of the problems we have in English is that not enough fiction is translated. And that every so often some, you know, foreign writer becomes immensely popular, like Elena Ferrante. And then there are so many other writers, often in that country, who just say, how did this happen, that this one got chosen? When there are other ones, like, how come everyone knows Borges and no one knows Juan José Sayer? Even though Sayer has been translated, even though The Witness, no matter what way you look at it, is a masterpiece. But, you know, and every time anyone reads The Witness, they say, how did this book not become? And almost every country and every editor, but every country can give you an example of a writer who should have been much better known. Miguel Delibes in Spanish, for example. Just you can think of so many people who should have been better known, so that you just feel, you know, what I used to find is I would scour the papers on a Saturday to see if there was any little mention, and there would often be, as Athina says, it would be a little half paragraph would mention some foreign name, and you just go and look it up and see, I wonder who that is. And so, and the reason for this is just simple. It's about taste and it's about survival. It's about finding that you would get immense pleasure from something, that you would find. I mean, it became an exploration, and it was. I think that when people recently discovered Annie Ernaux, and I know that everyone in France is, well, we knew her for, but in English, the fact that slowly this figure, Annie Ernaux, became popular, or people started to talk about her, and just getting those books, when I got them first, which is about 5 years ago, I don't know anyone who has read this book. And that lovely feeling of this is not, this lack of recognition is not going to last with Annie Ernaux. And so yeah, it's just about it's about being responding excitement, just and that something that came from Hungary or from Poland or Romania was likely to offer as much excitement as someone. And there is, I suppose, a notion of a small country that, you know, I know so much about London by this time, and indeed Paris, you know, that the notion of finding if someone wrote a novel set in the Canary Islands or, you know, in Mauritius, it would perhaps hit me harder or make me more excited.
Yeah, well, and just Anna, if I could just, you know, taking up what Colm was saying there. I mean, have you felt like in your careers, translate both of Colm's and other work, that sense of excitement that you're kind of bringing names to people's attention or work to people's attention that people hitherto hadn't known about in the Francophone world? Do you feel yourself as that kind of, as an advocate, pioneer, explorer? You know?
Yes, with Colm, definitely. When I read The South for the first time, it was like, wow. And yes, that was definitely the feeling. There was huge excitement. And then following him over the years, of course, yes. And see what he was going to do next, and with a few other writers that has happened as well. I feel the excitement a lot. I mean, in France, because contrary to the English-speaking world, we have a lot of literature in translation, because that is part of France's conception of itself, you know, that the literature from the whole world should be, you know, available in French. So there is a huge office of the Ministry of Culture that is devoted to supporting foreign literature. You know, and that's why there is such a quantity and such a quality of body of translated work. You know.
Yes, well, I suppose consider yourself fortunate, because that's what I know organizations like our sister organization, Literature Ireland, and they're you know, are very active, you know, in trying to promote Irish literature in translation. But you know, sometimes it's trying to get the requisite levels of funding can be quite challenging, making you know, authorities wake up to this. Shall I say? I was just in terms of what, you know, Anna was saying there. I mean, do you feel, as a translator working in the Polish language world, that there is a kind of receptivity or openness, not just to your translations of Colm's work, but more generally? Is there?
You mean translated literature from other countries?
Translated literature,
yeah, I think it has to do with, you know, peripheral cultures and central cultures, like, you know, the British Empire countries being the central ones, and, you know, Poland, which has been independent for 100 years, has always been peripheral. So the peripheral cultures, they tend to translate more and they tend to absorb more. That's the trend. So we have a lot of translated literature, and a lot of is being translated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What I might do at this stage is, we have a number of questions that from the audience this evening. So I might look at some of these questions, and I have a question here from Oya, which it's a question for Colm and the translators. And so the question is, would you say there is an underlying German tone to some dialogues in The Magician? So maybe, Colm, do you want to begin by answering that now? I'll you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, because what do you do if you're writing a century later in another language, and you're writing dialogue about the family of a writer, someone who gave you enough evidence in their own work of what dialogue could be or should be. I mean, what do you do with that? And then the answer is absolutely nothing. It takes you nowhere. If you attempted now to try and replicate how you think German people might have spoken in German in 1900, and you are putting this into English, you are going to write a book of the clunkiness, of a sort of parody of what writing is. You have the minute you try it, you look at it, you think, well, whatever that is, there has to be a theory of why it's so bad. It's not just bad, it's theoretically bad. And you've got to, what I did was I wrote the dialogue in the book emphatically, as though Hemingway were the governing spirit rather than Thomas Mann. In other words, that I certainly didn't put the verb at the end of the sentence at any point, except once when I have someone German speaking in English but losing it, and but the rest of the time it's very clipped, short, and a lot of interruption. And it's all. There are moments where I was even looking at dialogue in film in sort of Humphrey Bogart, or I was trying to get the children to be smart, to say really, really short, sharp, smart things, and therefore, so it was. I looked at the original and realized there was no future in it. And so I don't know how you would translate that back into German. I mean, it's just happened. So I'm going to German. People are going to tell me. But how a translator would get my effort not to write in this way and try and put it back into the language for which actually conceptually it initially comes, really is, I suppose, a task that I wouldn't like to be faced with myself. But I have to take some responsibility for causing all this trouble.
Right, Anna, did you? I mean, you've seen the text. What would you think about that in putting it into French? Would you, because people, so they know this is about a German writer and his family and so on. Would there be a set of expectations about how they're supposed to sound that you would have to deal with, or?
No, that's not a problem at all. I would say, Colm, you made one concession. You write Frau und Herr, Herr Immertal und Frau Mann when they are in Germany. Yes. you made that concession.
Oh, a few times.
All the time. Yes, all the time in Germany. While they're in Germany, it's always Frau und Herr.
Oh, yes. Oh, I used Frau and Herr. I couldn't
Yes.
use Mr. You see, you can't really say the teacher, Mr. Immertal, came in. There's something wrong with that. So it has to be Frau Mann. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's something funny about Mr. and Mrs. That they really have a local sound to them in English that doesn't work, even if you're writing in English, but you're writing in a German context. No, Anna, you have me there. You're absolutely right on that.
Right. Jerzy? Oh, sorry, Anna. Please
No, I was just saying that the book about Thomas Mann, just as the book about Henry James, in a way is a bit easier than the others to translate into French, because you have all this European culture, and the smartness and the gossipy, that's easier,
Yeah, easier than the more local, more specific stories set in specifically Irish settings.
Well, not specifically Irish, but the specifically low-key ones. It's always easier in French when there are many people and a lot, and this kind of verbal parade. I mean, the Mann family are just, it's a verbal parade from breakfast on. It's incredible.
Yes, it's a house that's full of words. And Jerzy, translating to Polish, this question about the Germanness of Mann and so on.
Well, I haven't started working on it yet, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. But I wouldn't really worry about Germanness aspect. I mean, there are so many other things in this book that the scope of it is huge. And I also found it very funny. There's a lot of humor, and that will be a challenge to make it fun in Polish too. So I don't really think that the German aspect is much of a problem now.
Athina, can I? There's another question that's come in here for the translators, and that's from Ray Walsh. So, have you ever reached a point where a line seemed impossible to translate, and if so, what did you do to overcome this?
Yes, I have. And it was in the Blackwater Lightship. Not one line, two lines. The first was solved by Colm Tóibín himself. During the Dublin Writers' Seminar in 2008, he had said that he doesn't want Gaelic translated. So I let Greek readers imagine what the meaning is. But why I did that? Because I realized that the author wanted the Irishness kept. But there was a phrase which I have written down. She pretended that she was a Protestant being driven to Leamington House by this slow country priest. Well, it was very difficult to translate this phrase because we couldn't find what Leamington House is. It was not very easy to understand why she was pretending that she was a Protestant. I mean, difference in her behavior. So they were dealt in the translation after all. As I felt that it was important for the Greek reader to be able to relate to the cultural and historical context of the novel. But I had to ask friends from Ireland to explain that.
Right, to sort of deal with that. So that was one way of coping with the. Anna, were there moments where you kind of thought, what am I going to do? This is impossible to translate.
I was extremely lucky because for everything that had to do with Ireland and Enniscorthy specifically, I had Colm's agent, who later became his publisher, who happens to be from Enniscorthy. Oh. And her name is Maggie Doyle. And she could answer all the questions. And if she couldn't, her father could. Oh yes, that was the place where all the drunkards used to, by the river there, So everything, the huts, there was different huts. Oh yes, that was the hut of, I don't remember now exactly how they were called. So that was no problem. I have no memory really of something untranslatable, doesn't come to me.
Right, so there was no dark night where he thought you would never get to the end of it.
I forgot.
Okay, it's fast.
I remember one. Fuck the Pope, that was a difficult one.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I remember when Colm got to the publishing house, he opened the book and he started looking for that one. He wanted to see how it sounded.
How you said fuck the Pope in French.
Yes, right, exactly.
Okay.
It was the only thing he was interested in. The rest, no.
All the translations not fit to print. Jerzy, did you have? Were there dark moments? I mean, where you got stuck, or?
With Colm, I have always been in this very comfortable situation that whenever I had a question or doubt, he was always very kind to explain anything that was problematic. So not really, there was not really anything untranslatable. There was some Irish things that I asked him about, and especially with Nora Webster, which was set mainly in Ireland. There were a few things that I was not sure about. And I don't know if you remember, there was a scene when Nora took her children to Dublin, and then the children tried to make fun of the way people in Dublin speak. They mocked Dubliners.
Yeah, people say book. People say they would say book. And,
yeah,
a book. Have you read a good book? And
exactly that one.
Funny. But how do you get that in Polish?
You just have to invent it. You just have to invent something. You have to invent something funny. So you have the same effect. It must be funny, yes, because they made fun of it. So I just invented some. I just made some vowel changes in Polish so that it's yeah, it sounded a bit comic. Because you don't have a Dublin version of English in Polish, of course. So, and using let's say Warsaw version of Polish, which doesn't really exist. We don't have a specifically Warsaw way of speaking. Then that wouldn't work, because you wouldn't want this kind of geographical reference suddenly. Warsaw way of speaking in Dublin. That wouldn't work. So you have to invent something.
Yeah, it's funny the example that you were giving there, because Sylvia Beach and Adrien Monnier, when they were their bookshop in Paris, but it was Sylvia Beach used to say that Joyce always referred to Ulysses as his book. That was actually, but it was really funny in this documentary that came out in the early. I mean, she just reproduced perfectly the way that Joyce pronounced the word. So it's this kind of maybe if I can, because I'm aware of the fact that we've been together for more than an hour now, and Colm had a previous interview.
I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I'm absolutely perfect.
Yeah. But the question I wanted to ask you, Colm, because it's just come up here in one of the questions is yes, Colm, what are your thoughts on Hermann Hesse? His friendship with Mann is well known. Do you derive anything from his literature? So this is from Emilia Kauka.
No, I couldn't get anything from the relationship because it was very fraternal and friendly. Whereas the one we say with Arnold Schoenberg or with Brecht, there was drama because there was conflict. And Hesse didn't end up in California, so that even though that relationship was really well documented, I think another writer might find something in that, but I could get nothing from it for the book. It wasn't something I could work with.
It's another question here that's from Antonia Garopolo. Colm, how can you understand if the translation of your books satisfies you in languages that you don't know, maybe not even their alphabet? Are there any criteria, for example, length of sentences, perhaps? I mean, would you go around foreign bookshops and?
I think that way madness lies, that if you started to go to Estonia and go into a bookshop and start counting, did they use, I think, and with Greek, I think you would have a particular problem, that you would even be able to read no, I mean, you really can't start that. And, I think there's an important point of what Athina said, and you're thinking about translation, that you cannot, as you're working, start wondering, how will a translator deal with this? Especially if you're in somewhere like Enniscorthy, it's local, people are using local idiom, but also Leamington House is in Enniscorthy. So Leamington House is a posh house, but only Enniscorthy people will really know this. But if I try and make it generic or global, I lose the thing. I lose the moment where she's a little girl and she's only can think about local things. And she wants to sort of be very formal and authoritative with this priest. And she needs to change her entire being. And the only thing she can think of is to be like a little Protestant girl. which is our idea of posh, and go to Leamington House, her idea of posh. But if I start making Leamington House into, and go to a house that was, I lose the moment of her thinking. And that's, I think, an important thing to do with, if you start thinking about translation too much, you could actually find yourself writing the global novel and losing everything, because you're, in that case, she's locked in the town and you can't really unlock her without losing her.
I just want to get translators like to come in here. I mean, is there a sense in which that the real joy in translation is working with the details, with the specificities? It's not working with the generic. It's working with precisely those things that seem to be very specific or very local or hard to translate. Anna, what would you? Do you think it's precisely dealing with those, the very local things that Colm's mentioned, that's what gives you the joy as a translator, dealing with that?
Well, not really, because that's where you start pulling your hair. That's where you start going crazy, because how are you going to make it? You can't. So there are always things that are going to be lost. Of course. So the joy is not there. The joy is in managing to convey something that is I don't even know how to say it,
Athina, just do you do you feel that for you it's the sort of it's dealing with those things that appear to resist the translate, that they're the things that actually prove to be the most creative, the most satisfying? Yeah.
Will you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So I was supposed to say that is it translating things that are very particular, specific to a culture, that they provide the most interesting challenges in translation?
Yes, of course. I think that they provide a very interesting challenge. Yes. And I met that with House of Names and Nora Webster as well.
One of the questions that's come up here, Colm, which I think maybe is from Laura Fitzgerald, and maybe it seems to echo some of the other questions that have come up. So were there ever times when you felt uncomfortable relinquishing control of your writing to translators? Did you ever feel?
Look, there's something really funny, and it's slightly hard to articulate, but just bear with me for a second while I try. It has especially happened with Anna Gibson, and it's something she must know, but it's also happened with Jerzy, and it's also happened with a few people who have translated a few books. But just let's stick to Anna and Jerzy, where a while ago I was in hospital a lot, and a lot of surgeons got to look at me. And, if I met one of them socially, I think I would have to look at him or her and think, they know something about me that no one else knows. I mean, they know what I'm like under anesthetic, and they've sort of seen me. I've been seen by them. And what would that look like in the sort of domestic or social domain? And so too with Anna, where when we meet, I look at her and think, she knows something about me. She's been in there. She's sort of seen the set of tricks, and she sort of knows what I do in extreme moments, what I will look for. I think she referred to that earlier as being, like that once you translate one book, you can see certain things coming in others, or you can see, even more important, the evasion, the erasure of certain things that were just tricks, to try and get new tricks. And so there is a funny business of, yes, handing over your body to a surgeon and an anesthetist, and handing over your novel to a translator, which isn't, and it is the business of course you must do this in order to, for the culture to be healthy, or for you to be healthy. But there is a feeling of being known and seen from as it were, within, that it isn't just, you see, uncomfortable, it's actually enjoyable in a certain way as well. It's, yeah, it has, I mean, I'm not saying it has exactly an erotic charge, because that would really be going very far, but it has, meeting Anna in Paris and looking at her for a second, she always gives me a look meaning, I think I know you. So
that's so untrue. It's so wrong. It's interesting.
Well,
it's interesting. I would say one thing maybe that translators and writers have in common is that they don't know much, but they are observant people, you know, and they are very observant of written words. No. So, of course, some things can be seen, but then what? I mean, no interpretation is being made of it, you know? It's not a knowledge. What would you call it? And it's certainly not on a bag of tricks. Certainly not on that level. No. No, it's more of maybe you start to, when you're a translator, you start to feel where the heart is beating, where things are happening, you know, but that's it. You don't do anything with it. It's just that you feel, oh, okay, because you recognize it from earlier books, you know. Whereas you yourself cannot do that, because otherwise you cannot go on writing, could you?
Well, one of the things that always strikes me when we discuss translation is the just the kind of metaphorical creativity in thinking about translation itself. But one that hadn't occurred to me up until now, but has come up, is this notion of translation as kind of an operating theatre, you know, where you know, things are exposed, and we get to look in detail at somebody's work and writing. So I think what I would like to do now is to very much thank Colm Tóibín, and I would also warmly thank our three translators, Anna, Athina and Jerzy, for giving us insights in very different languages, very different perspectives, very different cultures, on the nature of the translators' work, and just how important that contribution is, particularly as this day where we're honouring linguistic diversity and translation. And you know, I'm left with this image, you know, of the kind of the translation, the translator and the writer, and the kind of the degree of, or depths of self-revelation that come with that. And so thank you again. I would also like to thank everybody who participated, because we had a very, very good turnout this evening. If you are interested in what we do in the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation, if you go onto our website, and you could see it there on the slide. And if you want to go a step further, you can become a friend and supporter of our centre, so that we can continue to do the work of bringing news about writing in translation coming into Ireland and writing in translation coming out of Ireland. So Gormimaigiv, Iwa, and we'll see you again very soon, hopefully at one of our events. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.